Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the July 13th meeting of the Historic Resources Board. Would staff please call a roll?
Chair Bernstein.
Here.
Vice Chair Bauer.
Here.
Board Member Corey. Board Member Benenberg. Here. Board Member Kohler. Here. Board Member McKinnon.
He's here. He's in the back.
Board Member Wimmer.
Here.
Council Member Holman. Okay, 6 present.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is oral communications. The public may speak to any item not on the agenda. I don't see any speaker cards. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak to us on any item not on the agenda? Seeing none, next to be agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Are there any revisions? Vice Chair Bauer.
I would like to request that we review the minutes of our 2 prior meetings at our next meeting. We had a lot of information to cover for this meeting, and I didn't get a chance to review the minutes. And if other board members are comfortable with that, then I'd like to suggest we do that.
Okay, any comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll review those at another future meeting, sometime in August, perhaps. Okay, next will be our city official reports. Are there any reports to make?
No reports, other than we are planning to cancel the July 27th meeting, but we will have the August 10th meeting, and we do have a meeting with items on that. One of the items is going to be the joint, the topics for the scheduled or tentatively scheduled joint meeting with the council and HRB, which is at the end of August 28th, I believe is the date.
Great.
So be thinking about topics. You can email me topics if you like, and then I'll put that on the agenda, discussion of topics, and have some lists of things.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is a study session. Discussion of historic resources report prepared regarding the Stanford General Use Permit Amendment application. Shall staff have introductory comments for us, please?
Thank you, Chair Bernstein and board members. Hillary Gittleman, the planning director. I wanted to thank the representatives of Stanford University and the county for being here today. We had asked them to make themselves available for the board's review of the technical study that supports the EIR that's being prepared for the Stanford GUP. So Dr. Jones is here from Stanford. I think she'll probably offer a brief presentation, and then we're interested in the board's comments. Any comments you have will help us, when the draft EIR comes out, formulate the city's comment letter back to the county. So that's all I have to say, but we're happy to answer questions after Dr. Jones's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jones, please, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be back again so soon. Our Historic Resource Survey has 5 authors, and 2 of us are here today. Sapna Marfadia, my colleague, the Director of Architecture at Campus Planning and Design at Stanford, is going to present the architecture section of this. We did a run through. We're on time, so hopefully we'll get through it efficiently. Our agenda is to talk a little bit about why we did the survey, what our goals were in the survey, and then we're going to discuss the historic context framework we constructed for evaluating our academic buildings. And then briefly, we'll talk about the results of that survey in the Historic Resources at Stanford section. I'm sure you've all had a chance to see the document, and it's very long. So we're trying just to give you an overview about what our thoughts were as we prepared it. These were the objectives that we wanted to identify architectural styles that represent the evolution of collegiate architecture. The first thing we did, we're following the Secretary of the Interior standards for preservation planning, a set of standards that talk about how to do a survey, and you need to identify your property type and develop a theme based on your property type. So for our college buildings, we developed a framework that's about collegiate architecture. We then looked at buildings at Stanford and whether they embodied important examples of the themes in collegiate architecture. It's the framework for compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So buildings that are found eligible in the survey, once the county accepts those findings, will then be subject to compliance with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. We evaluated all the buildings built before 1974 in the survey area, and we've committed in 10 years to doing an addendum to the survey that would bring us up to 1984. We felt it was too soon to be looking at 1984. So the survey scope, I'm sorry, I apologize, it's a little hard to see on the slide. There's a blue area up there in the middle of that map, which is the development area for the general use permit. It is our academic campus. So we didn't survey the campus open space because there's no proposed development there. And we didn't survey the faculty subdivision because it's governed by zoning and not entirely by the use permit. The document includes a historic setting, a narrative history of land use and development in that blue zone. And then it includes the development of the context and evaluation framework. And then in the appendices, which are more than half of the document, there's the inventory of collegiate buildings. All 400 buildings and our findings are in Appendix A. Appendix B is the Department of Parks and Rec registration forms, which is the county's format for recording significant properties. And Appendix C is about non-collegiate properties, which we'll talk about a little bit later, things that didn't fit within the college theme. Let's see if that'll go. It's not moving. Oops. Amy, I'm stuck. Here we go. Let's try it again. I can't see that. Can somebody help me get it back on there? It wouldn't advance and it kicked me out. I know. Is it down there? You can see it, Sapna? Okay, sorry. It stopped advancing. It's not going down. I don't know what. There we go. I'll try this scroll. Yeah, I don't normally roll. All right, so historic setting. This is the history section of this document. It was prepared by myself, Anthony Kirk, who's a consulting historian to us, who did the agricultural histories, and Julie Kane, a historian for Heritage Services, who wrote the history of the development of the campus itself. It's a narrative that follows in chronological order and is essentially the story of the university. Let's see if that's... now I'm going to introduce Sapna, who's going to come up and talk about the historic context that we developed. What I would say, as she's coming up to talk about this, is that we started by looking statewide at colleges and universities, and we quickly discovered that that was too big. There are over 250 colleges and universities built before 1974 in California, and so we zeroed in on an official planning category, it turns out, which are the Bay Area counties. There are over 70 universities in our comparison set, and this is, and you know, it was really actually a joy to go through this. Julie and I researched all of those universities, found out where they were founded, identified the buildings from these periods at those universities, and the Bay Area, I have to say, has a wealth of really beautiful colleges and universities. So Sapna's going to explain the collegiate architecture.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk more about the architecture, and we're going to start really broad, just identifying what it meant to, be a university on the West Coast. We're going to, for the time being, ignore there were old universities in the not West Coast, but the West versus the East. So there were universities in the East, but the West had the universities begin in the medieval ages, and the original universities that started were in Bologna and Paris, and their focus was mostly religious. They comprised of buildings and scholarly community which exchanged ideas, but their fundamental focus was training for religious purposes. And so their universities actually demonstrated that layout. The layout was mostly cloistered and monastic in their kind of ethos. I'm going to try it. So here you see the University of Bologna and some of the older universities in Salamanca and Humboldt University as well in Berlin. If you look at the monastic layout of this and then compare it to the American examples, the early British American universities, 9 of them, which we now today call as the Ivy League, they were mostly on the East Coast of the United States. And they initially started more organically. They converted buildings that were already in use, and they were more of the colonial flavor into university buildings and utilized them. Eventually, they came up with what is called the 3-building quadrangular plan. And the big difference between the European universities and the American universities was that they had now, first and foremost, they were not that cloistered and monastic in their approach, more open, representative of the university, the culture over here, and also in terms of the focus was no longer just religion. It had a more academic focus now. Going to so then we basically looked at the universities as they started, and the very first university that kind of came very intentionally with the purpose of academics being the main area of focus was the University of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson, and he again followed the same kind of U-shaped quadrangular plan, but there were many more styles introduced, and he focused on the classical architecture. He reintroduced classical architecture to create that national movement. And thereafter, the Chicago University, we looked at that as well, and that is kind of in the same kind of time period as Stanford, in fact, by the same architect, and has a more Gothic flavor. So I wanted to just define the word style a little bit better because it's a little confusing. Style is more, it has 3 ways to look at it. One is that you can look at it as the way of construction. So post and beam construction versus an arch construction. These are the different ways that we constructed from antiquity and we continue to construct today. But then there is also how you ornament, and the Baroque would be a good example of that, where you apply ornament onto the building, and that therefore the name is given as Baroque. And then there is some styles are only referring to the historic period. So like late Victorian would be an example of a historic period that we're talking about. So as you can see that the collegiate architecture in America had a whole variety of styles. And the word revival occurs pretty frequently because most of these were imported, adapted to the local climate, to the local available material, and the image that they were trying to impart. And therefore, they all had a kind of particular look. And we studied those in order to kind of identify where Stanford fit in. Then coming to how we went about identifying the themes, we have 5 themes here, starting from the pioneering campuses, late Victorian, arts and crafts, romance of the West, and regional modernism. On the left-hand side, you see the periods of significance of each of these themes, and they're in increments of about 25 years each. And on the right-hand side, you see the styles that identify with these themes. And you will see that there are subcategories of each style in these themes, and that helps us identify the character-defining features of each of those styles. So then I will go briefly over all the campuses we studied in starting in these themes. So Pioneering Campus, we have a few good examples of this. This is mostly in the Second Empire tradition, and UC Berkeley and Mills College has good examples of these. The late Victorian, I will cover more extensively when we go into Stanford, because there are very few examples, in fact, almost none in the Richardson Romanesque in the Bay Area, and we do have some in the neoclassical, also very prominently featured at Stanford, and then we have the shingle style, which is represented by the Dominican University.
Yeah, Samnan, all the slides that you're showing us, are they also in this book?
They are.
Okay, great, fantastic, thank you.
I mean, they're not in the slide form, but yeah, the pictures are all derived from that book.
They're in here,
yes.
okay, great, wonderful, thank you.
So then we come to the arts and crafts movement. The thing to kind of remember during the arts and crafts, this is post-earthquake in California, and also the time of the First World War. So this was a major influence in the way the architecture kind of came into being. And a lot of the young architects had gone to Europe, gotten trained in Beaux-Arts in Paris, and they kind of imported that style, which was, again, classical revival in its flavor. There was a parallel movement going on in terms of arts and crafts. In contrast to the very formal and very kind of monumental ethos of the Beaux-Arts, the arts and crafts was more handcrafted quality of the architecture, and so both of these things were going parallel in the university campuses at that point in time. And we have good examples of both of them. In fact, Stanford University has one of the good examples of the arts and crafts movement as well. The big debate at this time, of course, was whether you recall historicism or you move forwards in terms of the more modern architecture. And we'll touch on that when we come to the modern period. After that came the Roman. Yeah, sorry. So this was the. Sorry. Yeah, these were the two, the UC Berkeley for arts and crafts. the UC Berkeley for the Beaux-Arts and the French House at Stanford for the arts and crafts. And then going to the Romance of the West, which is 1925 to 1949, this was a period mostly influenced by the expositions, where San Francisco and San Diego both held major expositions, and there was a revival movement of getting the Spanish architecture into the forefront, and Spanish and Mexican flavor architecture in the forefront. And so those two we have a lot of examples on campus, and we have a lot of examples in the Bay Area of this particular style. Then we come to the regional modern period, which is 1950 and 1974. And this is a very interesting period. The Bauhaus School of Art in Germany took over from the Beaux-Arts School in Paris, and so a lot of the architects were trained in Germany at this point in time, and because of the war, some of them even moved to the United States, and they had a major influence in the way the architecture represented itself. Additionally, now the new world kind of had more confidence. America wanted to portray a certain kind of clarity in their architecture and their overall look. So there's the architecture turned more efficient, less ornamentation, and very, very streamlined design. And we have three kind of styles represented in terms of brutalistic, mid-century modern, and the regional, the second Bay tradition, or the Bay tradition architecture, which was a regional response to the modern movement. So now having laid the foundation for the overall architecture in the Bay Area, we focused on Stanford and looked at the same 5 themes in terms of the Stanford context. And starting with the pioneering campus, we have no second Bay, the Second Empire architecture at Stanford, and so that period did not make sense. But there were some in the agriculture, Stanford had some agricultural buildings during this period, and Laura will go over those. What we are exemplar is of the late Victorian style, and the Richardson Romanesque with mission influence is probably the most well-known, iconic Stanford, and very famous in terms of what we have in the Bay Area, and is probably the only good example of this kind of style in the Bay Area. Going to the arts and crafts movement and Romance of the West, both those were influenced by the Richardson Romanesque architecture that was already on campus. In fact, the Board of Trustees kind of mandated using the same style, and therefore you'll see some of the architecture kind of responsive to that. And then coming to the regional modernism, we have very few good examples of that because, as you will see, Stanford tend to be more faithful to its original core in terms of the style, and almost rejected, I would say, the modern movement. So going to the way we went through this process, it's a 4-step process. We first identified important examples of each style within the theme and period. Then we went through and identified the character-defining features of each style, compared the Stanford examples to the regional examples, assessed integrity, and then determined eligibility. So criteria 1 and 2 was evaluated by Laura's team, and they kind of identified some of the significant events and significant people in this study that we have done. So focusing on the late Victorian theme, the most important, of course, is the main quad. Though it is one property, it comprises of about 27 buildings, and we have quite a few buildings that followed this style, including the Old Chemistry Building, Encina Commons, which was mainly because of the Romanesque arch, the buff-colored walls, and the red tile roofs. That became Stanford signature architecture, and that's what is become the signature architectural style as well. Then we have some examples of the neoclassical, where we have Cantor Art Center, which was a replication of the Athens Museum in Greece, and some examples of the shingle style as well. Moving on to the arts and crafts movement, this was mostly the post-earthquake. Stanford basically determined that it wants to, kind of stay again very true to its original core. And so the new architects, Bakewell and Brown, who were designing the next genre of buildings, were very true to the kind of Romanesque art, and they were trained in the Beaux-Arts school. So they brought that influence to California and to Stanford. And we have quite a bit of examples, both in the Beaux-Arts Northern influence and the Southern influence. And then we have some in the craftsman variety as well. The big difference to note is that instead of the sandstone buildings of the main quad, now the prevalent material was stucco. And though there are slight variations in the style, the campus basically maintained a very, very cohesive character. So the continuation of the architectural style and the color and the material palette created this continuity over time. During the next period, there was, as I mentioned before, the exposition influence, and so the Spanish colonial revival and mission revival became the preferred styles of this time, and we have quite a bit of those. This is also the time when enrollment increased because it was post-war, so there was a lot of dormitory building, and most of the buildings during this time are beautiful dormitories that are on Stanford campus. Next, we go to the modernism, and like I mentioned earlier, the modern genre of buildings that we have are modern. It's good to define modern at this point. As I said, it is kind of trying to sever its relationship to the past and be of the current moment. And we could not really let go of the architectural style that was very, very strong at Stanford. That includes the arch, the red color wall, the yellow color walls, and the red color tiled roofs. And so even our modern buildings have that same flavor, and though the material has changed and there is concrete that is very prevalent at this point in time, it still brings the arch and still brings the same elements forwards. Especially modern kind of has very streamlined look, versus our buildings have a lot of arches, and in some cases false arches at Stanford. But we do have very good Second Bay tradition architecture, which was a regional response, and it was more kind of in the flavor of low-lying buildings, not very monumental in their appearance, but kind of sit into the context that is the woodsy context that it was meant to be. And we have a very good example of that as well. So I'm going to turn this over now to Laura to talk about the non-collegiate properties that we have on campus.
Thank you.
The non-collegiate properties were primarily agricultural buildings that predated the founding of the university, like Leland Stanford's Red Barn, for example. What we used to evaluate these, because they still needed a context, was the Santa Clara County Historic Context Statement, which is very well developed for agriculture, which is, as we all know, is really important in the county. So we used the themes from the Santa Clara County Historic Context Statement to reevaluate. All of these buildings had been previously evaluated. The Red Barn's on the National Register, but we placed them in this context and explained how they met that eligibility that's on the DPR forms in the appendix. We created a little mini context for our fire truck house. We couldn't find any other colleges with fire truck houses, particularly with Victorian fire truck houses. So Julie Kane and I did a little study of fire truck houses in the San Francisco Bay Area. And there was, in the pre-1906 period, a type of fire truck house that was a wooden storefront, with just one little engine that came out of it. Communities that could afford it did these in brick, right, because it was fireproof, but places that couldn't did them in wood. And we actually believe that our fire truck house is the last wooden fire truck house in the Bay Area, and we love it, and we found it eligible for that reason. It turned out it's not very fancy neoclassical architecture, but it is a rare surviving example of its type. Hold on, I'm going the wrong way. So in the end, we did succeed. We were a little bit late. We missed the application deadline because it turned out to be a very big effort. This took 5 of us over a year to do. 400 buildings are documented in the inventory section. The sheds are in a table. The tiny little utility buildings are in a table. All of the other major buildings have an inventory sheet that explains the determination of eligibility at the bottom. And then we found 82 historic buildings, which were recorded as 50 properties. As many of them are building complexes, like the Quad. The Quad is one property that has 27 parts to it. Just to benchmark here for a minute, UC Berkeley has 45, right? Mills, I think, had 29 historic buildings. So we're fairly confident that this is a rigorous and protective approach to our resources, and that we didn't miss anything. And then briefly, our historic preservation programs. We do this in a very close partnership with Santa Clara County, who provide the regulatory oversight for our use permit and our compliance. There are community plan policies about historic preservation, just as your general plan, your comprehensive plan, has got these policies. And then our current general use permit conditions of approval require compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. And we developed a mechanism with the county where that's endorsed by a qualified professional architect. Sapna and her team do that. And then if there's any question about it, the county can hire a peer reviewer at our expense or refer it to the Historical Heritage Commission. We've been to the commission a few times over the years. And then the reason this works so well, actually, I have to say, is because Stanford, we plan all this in advance. You know, we own a lot of buildings. We plan in advance. We have our own planning department. And so with Dave Lennox and Sapna's leadership, we've developed a levels of service maintenance guide, and all of our historic buildings are the highest level of service. That means all maintenance projects are reviewed by Sapna and her team. She develops historic design guidelines whenever a building is going to be altered, so that by the time the county sees our project, it's already been massaged into compliance with the standards. The Heritage Services, we provide research support largely for those efforts, and the Campus Planning and Design and University Architects Office are doing that work of making sure our projects stay in compliance with the standards. Sapna and I also present our historic rehabilitation and restoration projects to the Stanford Historical Society Board for their comment, so at the board meetings. Sapna is doing that now because I'm currently the president of the Historical Society, but Sapna comes to our meetings and talks about what's going on with our ongoing projects on campus. We think this is a terrific and successful partnership, and similar to the partnership we have with our city properties with you. So I think that's it for the presentation, and we're available for any questions. And Kavitha Kumar's here from the county if you have questions about that, if you want to know more about the general use permit application. Catherine Poulter's here, so I'm sure that we could cover pretty much anything you might need to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. We've been asked to provide comments for possible inclusion in the city's comment letter on the draft environmental impact report this fall. I'll start with Board Member Bunnenberg.
Yes, I have some questions about the Herbert Hoover House, which has become the house for the president of Stanford, I believe. And I'm wondering, would it be at all possible to list it as the Herbert and Lou Henry Hoover House? Because I think that it is very unique that the wife of the President of the United States participated materially, according to Burge Clark and his father, Arthur B. Clark, and maybe that contributes to its not quite fitting into any category, and your whole list of what style it could be was absolutely amazing. But I feel that Lou Henry Hoover was a very significant person, which is one of the Secretary of Interior's standards areas, because not only had she accompanied him through his mining engineering work and all the other things that he did, but she helped to bring, in fact did bring, the Girl Scout movement to Palo Alto and to the surrounding areas. And we do have the little tiny Girl Scout house, which is now the Lou Henry Hoover Girl Scout House, located there in the Lucy Stern complex, but actually nearest to the children's library, that little corner. So is that a possibility that it could be called out in some special way to recognize her?
The house is actually listed on the National Register and was listed by Dorothy Regnery, whom some of you may have known, as the Lou Henry Hoover House. It's outside, technically it's outside of the study area because it's in the faculty subdivision, although I included it in the list of significant properties for association with Lou Henry and Herbert Hoover. Thank goodness I didn't actually have to tell you what style it is, because I'm glad I don't have to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you, Beth, that Lou Henry Hoover is worth honoring, and I found her to be a significant person. So I think we've taken care of Lou Henry Hoover, and I'd love sometime to get a chance to visit the Girl Scout house, because I didn't know that before. So I'll let you know what, maybe come over and take a look. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other board members? Board Member McKinnon.
Yes, there was a mention made of significant events in the report. And I recall, I don't know exactly where it was, but you mentioned that Klystron was one of the important developments in there. Do you have a building associated with the Varian brothers and the Klystron work?
Yes, that building is actually now the math corner of the main quad. So the physics department was in that corner of the main quad that's closest to chemistry in the museum. And in fact, the Klystron was built in the basement of that building. So we found the invention of the Klystron to be a significant event, and it's associated with that building. The main quad is actually eligible under 3 criteria. It's eligible for its association with the Klystron. It was eligible for the opening day of Stanford University, and it's eligible for association with Leland Stanford Sr. and Jane Stanford. So yes, it is associated with that building.
Okay. And I had another question there.
Yeah.
In the federal world, they have something known as Criterion G, which is properties less than 50 years that are of exceptional significance that may qualify. It occurs to me that such things as the guys who developed the search engines and things like that came out of Stanford. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, the Criterion Consideration G, which is association with people or events from less than 50 years ago, what it talks about in there is the standard that sufficient time must have passed to gain a scholarly perspective. And for some things, it's really hard to know, right? We have this, I go to the Computer History Museum all the time. I love this stuff. But at what point you know which of those inventions is the thing that changed the future? It all seems like change to us. So that's why there's the exceptional significance criteria. We were looking, obviously, at 400 buildings, and we took it to 1974. So we're within the 50-year category. But yes, we did consider that. We know that that criteria.
Was there any evidence of work developed by the founders of Fairchild Semiconductors that participated at Stanford?
There was I didn't find any evidence of that on the campus. There was a building in the research park near what's now Miranda that was actually redeveloped in the 1970s, I believe. So I think most of the early Fairchild work took place someplace else in Palo Alto.
Right. Other board members? Vice Chair.
I had one more question.
Yep.
I know on Frenchman's Road, I guess there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And is that out of your study area, or is that where
It's out of our study area, but the Hannah House is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And when we talked about the sort of levels of service issue, we have special houses at Stanford, which are the Lou Henry Hoover House, the Meyer Buck Estate, and the Hannah House, which are all very important historic homes. They have a maintenance project manager assigned to them. And Sapna and I also oversee any alterations to those properties. Yeah, the Hannah House, very, very important to us. It's outside the study area, but it's fully protected.
Yeah, okay, so that's not within your area of your study. It's significant, but not within your area of study.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Bauer.
I'd like to say that this is an astounding piece of work, really. I mean, the amount of information you brought together in this is really impressive. I'm hoping that there is an online access to this somehow, and maybe the city of Palo Alto ought to get a link on someplace in the Historic Resources Board area so you can go there. I'm wondering, Laura, if, I think you mentioned 50 buildings had potential to be listed on Historic Register. Is there a plan? How many of those are listed, and is there a plan to have them listed?
Well, there are 82 buildings, 50 properties.
Oh, okay.
About, I'm going to give you a guess here, about 27 or 28 of them. And, if you count the main quad, which is 27 buildings, so about 50 of those are already listed.
Okay.
Right? So they're on the Santa Clara County inventory. Some of them are on the California Register. Some are on the National Register. So many of them are already listed.
Yeah, okay, great. And it sounds like, regardless of whether they're listed or not, after you've done this research, they're going to be preserved.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a comment about the presentation you made. I have, as everyone knows, lived here my entire life, and I think that when I think about the Stanford architecture and the way in which it has progressed, that it couldn't be a better example of compatibility and differentiation. Every new building, because it had to have certain characteristics, is compatible in materials and colors, but of course it's differentiated as those design features progress. And that tension that you mentioned between looking back historically when you propose a architectural approach to a building, or does an architect want to look forward? That's the tension that we basically deal with on this board all the time. The perfectly stated phrase, I think, of that tension. So congratulations again. It's
Yeah,
really...
and we grapple with this, especially because we're the leading innovative institution on the West Coast and probably in America. So it's that tension that we also have to kind of balance at most time. But yeah, we've been very successful because our basic foundation was so strong and actually very flexible in terms of adapting itself to even the new kind of, if you go and see our McMurtry building, which is our probably most contemporary building at this point in time, it still has kind of, we like to use the word contextual. It has a contextual respectability to all its neighborhood.
I also was thinking that it is interesting to me that if you look at the names of the buildings as they progress through the 100 and some odd years of Stanford's history, that almost all the new buildings are either tech founders or tech companies.
Right.
So now, instead of having the Lou Henry Hoover House, we have the Samsung building.
Yeah, it's when I was doing research on this, I have to say that the definition of an American campus is like a place apart and with a cohesive character, so that we have transient population of students every 4 years they leave. So in order to identify and create an image in their mind, they are able to kind of identify to the strong space because it has such a strong image.
Yeah. Anyway, congratulations, a great document.
Thank you.
Board Member Wimmer.
I also wanted to echo Board Member Bauer's sentiment on what a wonderful piece of education and documentation, and I really enjoyed reading it. I feel like I like to continue reading it, and I've really learned a lot from it. And it would be great to see this become an actual book or a textbook or something for for the university and for other universities and architecture students to learn from, because I think it's such a great resource. And I also think, I don't know, for me, it seems like it should have a subchapter that has the houses, the professors' residences, because I know you mentioned the few that are on the register, but I think there's some other ones that are pretty significant in there, so it'd be neat to see some of that incorporated into it. But I had one question in the, when in your introduction, it says that the reason for the survey is to guide future project permitting. So I think that might be the ultimate goal of this document, is to guide. And I just wanted to know if you could speak for a moment on what that might entail, or what your thoughts on, is this to guide like new proposed buildings, or is this to guide alterations to these existing buildings? What was that all about?
Well, under the existing use permit, we submit building evaluations project by project. And so each project, when it came forward, Sapna and I would work together with our offices to prepare an evaluation. And so you have all this uncertainty. Is the building going to be eligible or not? And what are the character defining features that need to be preserved? And although it was actually the county's idea that we should prepare a comprehensive survey instead of doing these one by one, and we had resisted this a little bit because it is so much work. But we finally saw the advantage of doing it, because we do plan ahead at Stanford. It's sort of a 2 to 3 year capital planning cycle. And we invest a lot of time and effort programming those buildings and hiring those architects and trying to fit modern programs into late Victorian buildings. And so we could really see the advantage of knowing not just which are the truly California Register eligible buildings, but what is it that embodies their eligibility? What are those features that tell you that building is Richardsonian Romanesque, or tell you that building is neoclassical, so that you can make sure those features get preserved in the project. And this was really Sapna and her team's idea, that you nest the Secretary of the Interior compliance in the evaluation, because that then you give that DPR to the architect and to the programming team, and you say these features have to be visible when you do this project, right? And it has to still embody the feeling of a late Victorian building, certainly from the outside, right? So its other purpose is that the general use permit has an EIR, which studies potential impacts to cultural resources. And so this was our proposal about what those historic resources are. I did a separate piece about archaeological sites. And so the county's EIR consultants are reviewing the survey to make sure that it's adequate. I do believe they believe it's adequate. And it's the framework for deciding what the mitigation measures and conditions of approval are going to be. I don't expect them to be significantly different than the last set, because we were pretty successful with that. But it is, it'll be, I'm almost certain it'll be referred to in the conditions of approval. So it's that document. The previous GUP, as I said, just required that there be an evaluation for each project. Now the building evaluation is done, and you're evaluating the compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. So that's it, but it will actually be recorded and mentioned in the use permit and studied in the EIR.
Board Member Bunenberg.
Oh, again, I would like to echo the absolute amazement and delight of the amount of effort that has gone into this. I do have the wondering as to whether, one question is whether any of these buildings have plaques or things that let the public know as someone strolls through the campus. Is there some mention, or is one more sign too much? And also to maybe add to somebody's workload, is there any consideration of studying the Stanford Industrial Park from a historic background, because it was a very unique marriage of businesses and the people who were working on the forward-thinking technology.
Yeah, we just finished it.
Okay, so the first question, there are various plaques around the university. Our campus planning and design team has tried many different versions of this, and you know, our building occupants are very proud of their buildings and constantly want to put plaques on them, and we don't want too much of that. We do have a informational sign system that just went up for the Stanford 125th anniversary, so that when you're walking on the campus, you'll see a little podium sign that gives you historical information about buildings. That's new. And I have to say, there are a lot of buildings have history displays in their lobbies. And I put forth a proposal on behalf of the Historical Society to assist more departments with that, and with doing that in a more consistent and higher design standard way. Obviously, we try to unify planning on our campus, so we don't want 60 different types of historical marker, but we'd love to be able to share that history with the public. We talked about the Stanford Industrial Park the last time I was here, and what I had done as an overview of the development of the park, and certainly I think it deserves more study. I'm not sure who's going to do that, because as you know, the Stanford University is the landowner, but we don't own most of those buildings. So I'm not sure exactly how an overall deeper study of the research park might take place. Yep.
Dr. Jones, the Stanford Stadium built in 1921, that was demolished. Was that listed as a historic structure and then that was demolished, or was it not listed as?
The 1921 stadium was not demolished. So I know this is complicated.
Oh.
I spent a lot of time on it when we did the stadium project.
Oh,
so the
I'm confused.
1921 stadium is the earthen berm. So it was a Roman-style earthen berm stadium, like Yale Bowl and Harvard Bowl.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was the horseshoe shape that David Bauer was just telling me he's got a photo of that.
Yeah.
So then, when Pop Warner came to be football coach, he wanted more seats, and they were filling that stadium. These back in the old days, they could put 88,000 people in that stadium to watch a football game. So they built a big wood seat structure, and then they built a fake Roman Colosseum sort of stage set around to hide the back of the seats. Those, most of you are from Palo Alto. Underneath that, it was called the mine shaft. There was all this just wood, and then there was this faux colonnade that wrapped it's a later, 1924, 1926, something like that. So we found that the faux Roman colonnade was not significant, but that the original berm planted by the McLaren brothers was significant. And so when the new stadium was constructed, it was constructed inside the bowl.
Oh,
So that the original 1921 stadium is still in there. And so when you
okay, thank
go
you.
and you go up those concrete steps, or you go through the tunnels that are called vomitories, because that's how Roman we are, all of that is, and the planting of the berm, was protected in that project. So I know it's hard to tell, but all of us as locals will now remember.
Yeah.
And especially, at ground level, if you're out there in the picnic grove, you can't see that big cement superstructure in there. It is that 1921 stadium.
Okay, thank you for explaining.
And I
appreciate
wanted
it.
to protect it, so
Good.
I kept it eligible. That might be a bit of a reach, given its integrity, but it really is still there.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. The other question I have is for Samdan. First off, let me say, by listening to your presentation and also Dr. Jones' presentation, it seems like I just got through attending a 2-quarter historical class at Stanford University, all encompassed in 50 minutes. So thank you so much. It's fantastic. Good. You mentioned a cohesive theme of arches, red tile roofs, and yellow-colored stucco or stone stuff. My observation when I start looking at the Packard building and then the Hewlett building through there, I guess my observations are I'm not seeing that consistent cohesive theme of arches on some of the new buildings, even some of the bioscience buildings on Campus Drive there. Some very noted architects have done that stuff. And my observation says you're losing that cohesive theme of new buildings. But that's just my observation.
So we are very mindful when we are within that core, and we are kind of very consistent with our material palette. And I don't know if you've seen the McMurtry building. Yeah, so whenever it comes into the periphery or immediate neighborhood of a historic piece of architecture, we tend to make sure. Of course, the Hewlett-Packard buildings were the two that kind of were the first two that moved out of the main quadrangle and was the new engineering piece. I don't know if you recall, it was a much bigger piece. Now we have most of them gone, and we have created the new quadrangle, which again recalls the original architecture. Nevertheless, it's not in sandstone, it is in limestone now, but it is still the recall of the red roofs, though it might not have tile all the way to the edge, but it is the red roofs, the beige color walls, and still it has that same arc. It's a different arch. It is the segmental arch versus the more Romanesque arch, but yeah, it still recalls, the new quadrangle still recalls that flavor.
Okay, so it seems like what you're suggesting is that if I'm using Board Member McKinnon's comment about the area of potential effect.
Yes.
So it sounds like if you're near a significant historic zone, then that's when these consistent features might be more closely looked at.
Right, and especially in the medical area, it's kind of further away for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's outside the, so to speak, the campus drive loop, but it still has the limestone walls.
Right, yeah. When a project is, an existing building is considered applied to be demolished, see what level of, you talked about levels of service, what level of protection would a designated historic structure have? Is it, I mean, if the applicant wants to demolish it, is there any prohibition on demolition of any of these listed structures?
So the general use permit does not allow us to demolish these listed buildings. We would need to do supplemental CEQA analysis. We'd have to apply for a permit, and the county would then review alternatives to demolition. Right. And so for all of these historic buildings, there would be supplemental CEQA analysis in order to demolish them. Right. I believe we did that exactly once under this use permit for Encina Gem. So I would consider these buildings fairly well protected.
And the latest example we have is of the Old Camp building. We had it mothballed for many, many years, and probably many times it was discussed whether it should be demolished, but everybody was committed to making sure that it is not demolished, and now it's just been reopened, all restored.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, good. Right, any comments that, Board Member Vice Chair Bauer?
I just want to make one final comment. When you read the City of Palo Alto's response to this, I was saddened to see that the primary focus of that response is on traffic impact, which sadly now controls almost all of our decisions because we're so impacted. Obviously, all the rest of the work is, important, and traffic is very important. I'm just recognizing the irony that here you've brought this huge package of historic information to us, and what the city's focus has to be is on how any expansion of that affects traffic before we are totally gridlocked here, and maybe Stanford can come up with a solution.
Board Member Kohler.
Just one last comment, having been on the Stanford campus for over 50 years, most of it on a bicycle, as I remember, when you could ride bicycles and be safe. Now I wouldn't want to ride a bicycle, but Stanford campus is part of my whole growing up, riding my bikes over there all the time and taking my kids to the Stanford games, and Matthew playing basketball over in the Stanford campus. It's anyone who grows up, I suppose in any college town, it has this kind of feeling, but Stanford has made what we are a good part of it because it's Stanford being here. It's an incredible, not only buildings and everything, but the people and everything here. It's just an incredible thing that we all live in this area, that we should be very pleased about it, except for the traffic. I mean, that's having, I used to ride my bike a lot, but now I wouldn't be caught dead on a bicycle. It's so dangerous. I don't know why anyone rides their bicycle. But anyway, I just think very appreciative of this information. It's really quite fun. Having worked on a few homes in the campus there, the homeowners, the professors and everyone are really extraordinary people as well. I remember working with one professor, and his wish list was like a booklet. It was just amazing. So I'm very, it's very fun to watch Stanford grow in a way. But thanks for coming today.
Staff have any suggestions for HRB comments to include, if there are any?
Well, I think we have the time to give it a little more thought, and I wanted to invite board members, if you think of anything after this meeting and you want to send us an email, please feel free to do so. One of the questions I think the staff will have is how the individual resources that have been identified relate to each other and to resources that might be outside the area that have been evaluated. For example, the Palm Drive and the gate, does that relate to the main quadrangle? Is that somehow relevant to this project that's being evaluated in the EIR? We'll have to think about things like that. But if you think of anything else in your review of this material, I know it's a fantastic body of information. Please shoot us an email and we'll do what we can to incorporate it in our letter.
Great. Okay, thank you. Dr. Jones, is that the Stanford Gate that Ms. Gilman just referred to, is that in this area of study? Right as soon as you leave University Avenue and start Palm Drive.
The Palm Drive gates are not, because they're in campus open space, and no development is allowed there.
Okay.
But certainly we're very well aware of the gates. Sapna oversaw a recent restoration and conservation project at the gates, and we would heartily agree that they are a historic resource. They're not in the EIR because they're not a development zone.
Okay, yeah. Do they have any protection against demolition, those gates? Do you know of? Yeah.
If we they would have to be evaluated as part of a permit.
I see.
So if we wanted to propose, somebody wants to widen Palm Drive to 4 lanes, please don't, but let's imagine they did. Then that would be evaluated as part of the CEQA evaluation.
Yeah.
I actually believe the city had them evaluated as part of some project 10 or 15 years ago. Carrie and Company, I believe, evaluated them and found them potentially eligible for the California Register. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, I would chain myself to them, Martin. So, and I know Sapna and I would chain ourselves together to them. I think they're pretty safe.
They are actually the third generation. The originals have fallen during the 1906, and we've done now over 5 years, 3 restoration projects over there, making sure that they will not be kind of deteriorating, because they're further out, but they're not out of sight or out of mind for us.
Okay, great. Yeah. Even the palm trees, I think, seem to be landscape significant. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right, thanks. Right, any other comments before we continue? Board Member McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. I was pleased to see that you did have several pages on the Frederick Law Olmsted and his contributions to the historic landscapes, which I think is a significant part of the historic character of the Stanford campus. And I know there was quite a bit of tension between Olmsted and the Stanfords, between what Olmsted envisioned as the proper landscape for Stanford and what Mr. Stanford wanted. And I was pleased to see they had a section in there on page 40, 44, 45, 46 that discussed that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that concludes then this item. Next is action items. I see none on the agenda. Next, approval of minutes. We decided to review those at our next HRB meeting. Subcommittee items. Any subcommittee reports? Seeing none. Next is board member questions, comments, and announcements. Any board members have? Thank you, Dr. Jones. And thank you. Yeah. Yes, board member Vice Chair Bauer.
It's a question to staff. In the downtown area, there are several development signs up for adding antennas, either Wi-Fi or cell antennas, to light standards. And I wonder if that's coming before this board, where they're being placed in basically opposite historic buildings.
There's no proposal to bring that to the HRB. Definitely as part of the review, they include the staff and route the plans over to our historic team, which is Emily and I. So we're aware of them, and when at all possible, for instance, the Lanning Chateau was as a designated resource, and they were putting a faux mailbox or something, and as part of the equipment. Anyways, that's just an example of where we got involved and said, not here, put it somewhere else, kind of thing. So we are having a look at those, and when it does involve an actual historic resource, and Emily can provide more details if you'd like. But,
so the two buildings that I actually had thought about quite extensively, one is the Lanning Chateau and the street light right in front of that entrance. You couldn't get it closer there. And I looked around, and I'm not sure how they cite these, and that's a difficult combination of intersection, but it's unsettling to me. The other one is across from St. Thomas Aquinas Church. I think that's the right name of the church, on Homer and Waverly. And it's across the street, and unfortunately, the way the light standards are set up, it doesn't matter which one you pick, it's equally close. At least it's not, right in front of the church. But whenever those can be moved, even one light standard away from those historic buildings, I think we ought to, I hope the staff will look at that.
Okay. I also handed out to board members and staff this newspaper article from June 29th. It's talking about the IT&T building in the Baylands here. And what piqued my interest about the article was that the first paragraph, it says, the site of a historic radio station that picked up signals of trouble before the attack on Pearl Harbor has been added to Palo Alto Baylands Nature Preserve, which could lead to it being demolished. What I'd like to ask for a future meeting at the HRB to, maybe we can agenda this just so we can discuss it further, just so that we're on record if for any public records in the future, including city council meetings, that at least there's some HRB comment on record about the significance of a structure like this.
So I'd like to make a quick comment. I have visited that building with Phil Boble, who's one of the top people in public works, at his request to look at it from a historic standpoint. While the building was vandalized and painted, almost all the original architectural detailing excuse me, is still existent and with paint and some protection from vandals. That building would look just as good as the Sea Scout building does today. And it's not in as bad shape as the Sea Scout building was. So it's not a demolition candidate, in my opinion. But I think Martin's right. We ought to have a hearing about that.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that, because I've walked around that area, and it's again one of those events that was earth-shaking, because this station was not the one that carried information to the White House, as I understand, about Pearl Harbor, but was the one that sent the message back to ships, both Navy and private vehicles, to warn about this major emergency.
Great, good. Thank you. Any other board member questions, comments, and announcements? Okay. So we're heading to adjournment. So after this meeting, then there's a joint meeting with HRB and ARB. I will be not participating in that as the project on Channing Avenue. I have a active project just 2 houses away, so I'll be turning over that portion of the meeting to Vice Chair Bauer. So, good. Okay. Any other items before we then adjourn the formal HRB meeting? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.